Welcome to the panel, Decentralization and the Next Wave of Regulations, Challenges and Chances. We've heard a lot about the values of Web3 and the intrinsic idea behind it. When it comes to values, I think regulations are at the core discussing values, and we're making big compromises on that. Today we're going to discuss regulations and how they're going to affect us, and maybe how the future of regulations might look like. What are they targeting? What are they looking for? First of all, an introduction of who we are. So I'm Natalie, I'm with the Web3 Foundation. I'm the Director of Public Policy, focusing and making sure that decentralized public blockchains are not affected negatively by regulations, mainly in the US and Europe. Today I'm going to moderate these lovely people. So to my right we have Mariana de la Roche. She's an independent consultant and a board member of INATBA. It's a International Blockchain Industry Association. She's focusing on real-world applications, decentralization, AI, sustainability, human rights in the context of blockchain and new technologies. Then we have Reid Yeager next to her. He is the policy lead at Flashbots. He has years of experience in the DeFi space and the crypto space with a focus on policy research, and now at Flashbots research, and he's focusing on protecting decentralization of public blockchains. And then we have Joachim Schwerin, the principal economist at the European Commission, DG GROW. The Commission is focused on digital transformation of industry. His focus is on the real economy, so anything that concerns the production, purchase, and flow of goods and services within the economy. And in that context, he has also contributed and was involved with MiCA, Europe's first regulation addressing the classification of tokens. So this is who the people in this panel are. To start off, we thought we're going to dive a little bit into what has happened already, just in the US and Europe for now, and then dive into what challenges and problems are coming, what's new, how will it affect decentralization, because it has been kind of left a little bit out of the political discussion because they didn't know how to handle it, or did they? We can discuss. I'm going to start off with Joachim. Joachim, take the microphone. How would you describe the first wave of crypto regulations in Europe? And what was the intention? How did regulators view the whole thing? What was, their point of view? What was their aim? How did it play out?
Thank you, Natalie, and great to be here. I don't know what I like more, the spirit of this event or actually the venue. I love that venue from radio history. It's absolutely amazing. If you have a minute, dive into the architecture and the history of these buildings here. Absolutely fantastic. I'm an economic historian by trade, so that gives me a longer term perspective, and that's actually also where I want to start in answering that question. We heard it in the presentation before, the financial crisis. So we have these 6 historical weeks in the autumn of 2008, when we have the biggest crisis of the legacy system, of the centralized system, which was the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers, and then 6 weeks later, the Bitcoin white paper. And of course, at that time, no one noted because it was a historical coincidence in a way, or was it? But it is the starting point of the move towards decentralization that, in my opinion, as an economic historian, is an absolutely game-changing moment for humanity. And that is also how we approached it at the time. I mean, the financial crisis was the first of a wave of crisis that we still see today and that will continue in the future, which is basically the declaration of bankruptcy of the established system that is relying on centralized silos. And that means also that the power is not there for the small enterprises, for the people, but the power is for those who always had power, which was the problem for us in Europe concretely. In the financial crisis in Europe, 75% of small and medium-sized enterprises, and we have 25 million of them in the European Union, are financed through the banking system. And we realized politically how dangerous that was, and it brought whole countries to the edge of abyss, as you know. And we've tried tons of measures since then to fight that and to be more flexible in terms of financing enterprises and get a broader spectrum of financing alternatives. And guess where we stand today? 75% and up to 80% of small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe are financed through the banking sector. So you see basically that we are repeating historical mistakes and that we need to look into meaningful alternatives. Now, I maintain that the history of humanity has always been self-organization. Europe is the continent of self organization. People have always lived in a regional context. When you are in Barcelona, Italy is much closer to you than Madrid because you took the boat over the sea, not the car that you didn't have over the hills. So we have basically a history of people that are finding their own networks, that are living their belief systems, and that want to have their values respected. And that comes to very quick boundaries when you go to, let's say, the existing economy. But when you enter the digital space is huge. You can basically self-organize yourself in communities regardless of what your belief systems are, and there's space for everyone as long as we can agree on some very basic principles, and privacy and civil rights are of course very important ones of those. I mentioned that at a certain length because that describes actually how we approach the topic. We do not approach the topic in terms of regulation. We do not approach the topic in terms of control. That might be surprising if you consider the European Commission as a bureaucracy. But we had from day one a handful of people, a surprisingly large handful of people that already understood all of that before it was even on the political agenda. And in 2016, less than 8 years after the Bitcoin white paper, we made a public statement after having a long exercise looking into all policy fields and all technologies available of what would be the future of the European Union in terms of innovation and technology that we want to apply everywhere. And we identified 4. We identified artificial intelligence, we identified quantum computing, we identified genomics, and we identified blockchain. Blockchain for us has the same level at least as these technologies because it is much more than a technology. It is a social, cultural revolution that finally gets us into the type of decentralization that we want. Now, and I will be short because we have an interesting panel, the MiCA regulation then came. It is seen as a blueprint for a lot of stuff out there. The MiCA regulation, of course, is a tiny, tiny part of the crypto space that gives some rules for certain types of crypto assets with the idea of having a more liberal, a more lenient approach. And that is true because if you compare it with MiFID, if you compare it for those that know regulation with other existing instruments, our crypto asset regulation is much more liberal, much more market-oriented than anything we have in the legacy system. But there's a downside to that. The downside to regulation is not the text. The downside is always the political process and the implementation, so the standards. Imagine that we were fast on that type of regulation, but we started working on that in 2017, 2018, when the ICO hype was over, to be proactive in terms of bringing out the regulation. We had the draft ready in the middle of 2020. It entered into force last year and will become applicable. One part has already become applicable and the rest at the end of the year. That makes it 7 years. 7 years in crypto is 5 generations in the traditional system. It is absolutely impossible, in my opinion, to regulate anything meaningfully apart from tiny sections that are well defined, because the speed and the complexity of what we see in the crypto space is not subject anymore to traditional regulation. Traditional regulation is dead if you look at decentralization. And this is also, and we will discuss that when we look in the future, there is no way of having a meaningful DeFi regulation or whatever. But we wanted to be sure for those that want to play safe, for those that are in the legacy system, for those that think that crypto assets are more similar like traditional securities, etc., need to have rules, that we put a proposal out there specifically for stable coins. But this is not meant as a sort of imperialism to, let's say, intrude to all forms of decentralization. It just doesn't fit.
Okay. So MiCA is mainly targeting stablecoins and trying to also classify different tokens. Mariana, what problems have you encountered, or would you say is MiCA not addressing, or where is the weaknesses, where is the strength in it?
That's like 4 questions.
Well, okay, let me phrase it in regards to decentralization.
Well, to start, is like MiCA has like no target decentralization. Like this part in MiCA where like everything that is like fully decentralized will be outside of MiCA, which was completely done on purpose. However, this open what I call a rabbit hole, because it starts with the question of what is truly decentralized and what will be in and out of MiCA, right? And what you need to understand is that like MiCA is a regulation, but then it comes to the national authorities, so the member states, to start to do the actual implementation, which is what we have been seeing right now, and there is like certain slightly difference between the different member states. This is something that we have been like working for the past year with the support of the Commission and together with Nina Sittler, and trying to identify what are like the main pain points that we are seeing that the regulators are struggling when trying to implement it into the national jurisdictions, right? And this is like the nitty-gritty details that like MiCA doesn't cover, because again, it's a regulation, it's broad, and then just comes like to the implementation. We have seen a lot of issues with the decentralization part, and I think that there is like different problems that have come after MiCA with that. One is the misunderstanding that everything that is decentralized refers to DeFi, and this also includes DAOs. So this like merge of concepts creates a lot of ambiguity in the things that we have seen. And the other is the kind of gap with like this like fully decentralized, because like we cannot define what decentralization is, and decentralization is also like something that happens in period of time, so nothing starts fully decentralized. And then we need to start to understand what is that the regulator are seeing as the centralized points that they want to enter into look. And here there's a lot of discussions about the if you have a website, if you have a user interface, like are these already considered decentralized or not? Because you have like a user interface, that means that you are like doing like public offers, and therefore like this regulation will apply and all of this. So these are really interesting conversations that were happening right now. I don't think that is going to be solved in any time soon when it comes to this decentralization, but I'm really curious to see how the industry move forward, because as Joachim mentioned, there's no intention right now in the Commission to regulate DeFi, or for that matter, like decentralization, and I think that that's the right decision. What I'm interested in is to see like how the industry will like self-regulate itself, and what are like the kind of tools that we are putting as industry to just make the users more safe when it comes to the interaction with like DeFi applications, which also will push forward adoption. So that's the part that I think that we should be looking at right now, like more industry standards.
Talking about fully decentralized, part of MiCA has, like, as you said, they're kind of leaving out the whole decentralization part. But there was a Danish guidance. So basically the setup is this: the European Union brings out a law, and then the financial market authorities in the member states have to like define how this is going to be implemented. And in Denmark, the Financial Market Authority brought out a guidance now addressing the definition of what fully decentralized mean. So technically in MiCA, everything that is fully decentralized should be out of scope, but what does that mean? It was never defined. This guidance tried to do it, and mentioned a lot of aspects of it. Reid, do you want to go into it? Aspects that worry you or are interesting to you?
Yeah, and thank you, Natalie, for hosting us today as well. Just a quick disclaimer, not a lawyer. Nothing I say is financial advice. Also, views aren't that of a
Sound like a lawyer now.
Yeah, I think kind of just to do a little recap here as well, like when we talk about the European Commission, especially maybe in contrasting to the US, like the EU Commission has a monopoly on proposing legislation. It has a validator proposer monopoly. In the US, you have anyone can propose something in the legislature. So you have a very different dynamic between how legislation gets drafted and how it comes about. The EU Commission is much more technocratic. They actually dive into the details and look at things. In the US, much more power-centric. We might talk about that in a couple more minutes. But when it comes to MiCA and decentralization and the Danish report, I'm going to quote like The Wire here for all those that have watched it. Like Danish, they didn't respect the chain of command. They kind of went out and like put out this paper on decentralization that really wasn't necessary or asked for. But it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad at all, but it's still missing the point. And when we talk about MiCA, the one thing I want to clarify here is that MiCA does not use the word decentralization anywhere in it. Frankly, everything we just talked about is kind of the improper framing for MiCA and decentralization and DeFi. We're talking about one single line in MiCA that says, for the purposes of this legislation, it will not consider DeFi. That's all it says. It doesn't say decentralization, it doesn't say define DeFi, it doesn't say anything else. And so we've all just been speculating about what a proverbial MiCA 2 could look like, or does ESMA have certain types of regulations already within their power to regulate DeFi? And all of this, frankly, doesn't matter. Because the real problem is that we as an industry have almost used decentralization as a shield in the context that to define and educate lawmakers and regulators about our technology is not an intermediary. in only the context of securities law, financial regulations, we've used the concept of decentralization to defend against that. And it worked. It worked great for the last 6 years. It's helped us stay off like some really difficult financial securities regulation and also some reporting aspects around FATF and illicit finance. But now we're to this point where we've created this purity test of perfectly decentralized or DeFi in name only, genuine DeFi, whatever you want to call it. And these are just terrible terms. Because frankly, decentralization is not a regulatory concept. It is a technological goal that has to do with rational actors in a consensus system, in a decentralized system. And frankly, like, as many of the protocol engineers in this room might know, like, that changes on a day-to-day basis based upon like who is actually active in the system. And so to define decentralization from a regulatory perspective, we're going to get into a quagmire at the end of the day.
Yet, even in the US or everywhere, regulators kind of want to know how can we define it. And I think the industry itself also struggles what is decentralized and is it only decentralized in name? And regulators are trying to find parameters to define, okay, are you decentralized enough to not be a security? I think coming back to the US, that's what they've tried with the FIT21 Act. A lot of the discussion was what distinguishes you from security and how can we measure if you're sufficiently decentralized and what would be the parameters. And a lot of the comparison here was comparing it with, do you have control, unilateral control over that ecosystem? You want to add something?
Yeah, we'll take kind of a quick US-centric view just for a moment. You have to understand in the US, everything's about power. So whenever there's a new technology or a new concept, whether it's crypto, whether it's like rights to export liquefied natural gas or fracking or the rights to send shit up into space and put satellites up there, there's going to be new rules. And in DC, people gravitate towards like that area because new power is going to be created in that area. And there's either people on one side or people on the other, and it creates a gravitational force, this untapped potential energy of power that they want to harness. And so what you see around crypto is people on both sides because there's something there that they can grasp onto. And while the detractors of crypto in DC, we know like their talking points very well, but unfortunately the proponents have this gross mischaracterization of what is decentralization and securities law. And in the same way I mentioned decentralization was used as kind of the scapegoat to explain disintermediation of our systems and infrastructure, in the US, a lot of people have used the term commodities to kind of explain why they're not securities. And so that's why we're getting in the Senator Gillibrand in the Senate, her bill really focuses on commodities. FIT21, which is the US House of Representatives market structure bill, also focuses on commodities. But what they do is they've intertwined the concept of protocol decentralization and financial instruments, commodities and securities. And the token versus the system are two separate things, and we need to break kind of that connection.
Absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, the whole regulatory debate was very focused on the financial aspects of it, which has gotten us down a rabbit hole. I think if you think of Web2, the first use case being an email sent from A to B. Unfortunately, with Web3, it was financial value with Bitcoin, and that got us down this rabbit hole. But you mentioned power, right? And I think as a society, political representatives try to organize our society. And usually there's a lot of value debates happening. I think we saw that with the Tornado Cash case. Joachim, maybe you want to go there, where it's basically at the core of it, we're talking about privacy versus security, two technically valid values. And depending on your point of view, you will weigh one stronger than the other. And now we can discuss, depending on the law, whether that has merit or not. Tornado Cash has held the developers responsible for privacy-preserving solutions that have been exploited by bad actors. Can you, Joachim, from a point of view of a regulator and then from your personal point of view, bring some light into the reasoning behind it from a regulatory point of view and then also, of course, your personal view on that topic?
Well, that now, of course, is my personal opinion. Let me start with Web3. Web3 is about jointly creating and safely trading values. Values can be anything. So I think we should start the Web3 space without a prefabricated political opinion of what your individual opinion is or my opinion or whatever. It simply doesn't matter. The digital space is big enough for all our opinions to coexist. It's a technology. And that, of course, if that really works towards decentralization in whatever way, I agree there is no perfect decentralization. At the end of the day, when you consider it from a tech perspective, you have a tech stack, you will have levels in the tech stack that are more decentralized than others. It is extremely difficult to define that in a consistent way, but let's say it is possible to move meaningfully towards more decentralization, and that should be the objective. That, of course, is a risk to many vested interests. Now, the Tornado Cash, in my opinion, I might be wrong, is not about crypto. The Tornado Cash is a power game. It is a guy that has the wrong nationality, that has done something that benefited, again, a country that is problematic from a certain perspective. So basically, to put it open, the Americans dislike the fact that the Russian guy is living uncontested in the Netherlands, who helped get something out, which, among others, served the North Koreans. That has nothing to do with regulation. That has nothing to do with the approach that we take in the European Union. It is simply then when you get into the maelstrom of a legal procedure, then you cannot expect any different outcome, probably because you have judges that are not informed on anything they talk about. How can they, given the progress of stuff? You have a lot of hot noise, you have a lot of political pressure behind the scenes, and then this is what happens. It is a terrible, misguided judgment, yes. And now it has to be ring-fenced. And I think the part that we can play, apart from exerting our influence, is first of all not to be intimidated. I know that is difficult at times. I don't think that we all need now to become Satoshis, as someone has put out there. I think we can be assertive because we're doing the right thing. We have on the one hand side to educate people. Most regulators, most judges, most lawyers I know are very open to crypto. And time is playing in our advantage. Every year that passes makes it that younger people are moving into the space, and younger people are mostly pro-crypto. They've grown up with that industry. The biggest part is, of course, the gaming community. So we see that with the new European Parliament, the more time elapses, the younger people get, the more people understand the technology and what they are discussing about. The second thing is that we in Europe are 100% committed to open source. We do not accept anything else than open source, but we have our own tragedies. I remember a time when I was working on competition policy about 20 years ago. I was involved in the first antitrust cases against Microsoft. When we had the first billion euro fine against Microsoft for abuse of power, it was the same time that we signed a long-term contract with Microsoft to equip us with their equipment within the Commission, and we still have it today. And we have nothing else than Microsoft. So that's the schizophrenia that you have in public sectors, that you have people knowing about this stuff, but then you have a limited group of people that sit at the right places to take decisions, that basically do what they want and support the legacy system and the big techs. And that is something that we're also observing here. We maintain that everything we do in the crypto space, and that actually includes, check it out, what the colleagues in DG Digit of the European Commission are doing. We have, for the last 5 years, for example, built a massive open source blockchain infrastructure in Europe to detect fake products. It's live now. We've tested that and it's operational. All of that is open source. It is blockchain agnostic. You can onboard with whatever technology you would like to have it, and it works. The code for all of that, what we call verifiable credential, is on our websites. It's for grabs. Everyone can use it. We don't have a commercial interest. People can just check it out. That should be the approach. But we are under pressure from many places, including the member states, where now, for those of you that know the European project, the member states are telling us that they would like to take more control and not really Europe. And now we have the statutes of Europeum that say open source where possible. What does that mean, open source where possible? If you want open source, it can be open source. Let me conclude by comparing that to one thing which for me is very important. Consider Tornado Cash from the perspective of creating a smart contract with building a car in the real economy. We know that bank robbers in Europe like BMWs and Audis. So they all drive fast cars that are faster than police cars, which is basically German cars. So no one would ever come to their mind that when you find one of the new criminal groups again and you lock them up, that you go to the board of BMW and Audi and you arrest these people for having built Audis or BMWs. That's not in the product liability directive. That's completely outside our philosophy. How would you come to the conclusion that you produce a smart contract, you put it out there, it is used by someone, and then you put that person in jail? And that even includes kickbacks, because cars have kickbacks as well. You have now the service requirements. You bring your car, even if you're a criminal, you nicely bring your car twice a year to your car dealer to have it checked up again, and everyone knows that. It could easily prevent it. We have the mechanisms already on board. Mercedes is using that when you're using the wrong SIM card, just blocking down your car. It can't drive anymore. You can have cameras, you can self-driving cars, whatever. You have the technology there to prevent any type of crime that you do with a physical product. And that is completely for granted because it's what we always do in Europe. And suddenly in the digital domain, we have different rules. That is not logical. That is not acceptable. And that is, I think, when we move to a meaningful Web3 space, where we have an integration of finance and everything that we do physically as a sort of value set, which is at a higher level than individually what we do in finance. Finance, at the end of the day, is also normative value. It is not something that is set in stone. Then we need to have consistent rules that apply to everything in terms of collective liability, in terms of the responsibilities that you have as a builder, in terms of what you can really do, unless, of course, you promote that. I mean, if that guy had gone there, apart from buying his Porsche, he can buy as many Porsches as he wants, to go there and say that, oh, I love the North Koreans, I know, help you program all this shit, that you can really do that stuff, that's a different story. You do have a responsibility. That you also have to realize here, it's not that there is a free space, you're living on Mars, no rules apply. But if you do that in a respectful, I would say, meaningful way, that you also try to protect some social values, you have all the momentum with you to convince the large part of regulators and politicians that is open to these arguments. This being said, you have a certain minority of people there in the legacy system that are just out there to harm you. And I take one last example, Europol. They have just published recently a report. It is technology neutral written, but it says your knowledge proofs are a risk to public authorities. Yes, it is a risk because you can be private. If you consider private to be a risk, then you're not living in my world. I'm sorry to say that, but it's unfortunately a number of people that just take this view. This is totalitarianism, and we need to fight against that.
If I mind, like you mentioned so many things that it's going to be like really hardcore not to like just refer to some of them. Just to start, I don't think that like decentralization is just an idea that can be achieved as a technology. I think that is actually the ideal behind like everything that happened. We started with like blockchain and crypto because we wanted to bring back, as it was mentioned before in the panel, like back the power to the people, right? We have like the banks, we have exclusions, we have like this top-down approach all the time, and this is like the whole revolution that came like as an idea, right? And I think that decentralization is part of like that main idea and goal that we have back then. And on that note, I think that like, and I always say this, technology is just a tool. It's a tool that we use to achieve something. Whether we use it for good or for bad, it really depends on how we use it. And it comes to the leaders and the regulators to actually like, set that path for people to do it like that. You mentioned my background is in human rights, so I really look at what is the actual impact of the technology in the people. And when we talk about privacy, privacy is a fundamental right as well. So I do think that, like, of course, there is like some control issues, I will call, in our institutions, but privacy is really important, and the fact like that we have like privacy tools, it needs to be in place, especially when we don't have democratic countries that can harm the people or can use the same system to actually exclude the people that is against the system. And we have seen this already happening in some non-democratic countries. I'm not going to refer to any particular case right now. But I don't think the example of the car, when we compare to Tornado Cash, is accurate, because it's not the fact that they put the tool out there. I think that like developers should never be prosecuted. And on that one, I agree, like especially if it's open source. What I think that like we tend to forget in this case is that they not only knew that the technology was being used for something that was illegal, they also promoted it. And they presented the solution for that. And when you actually are doing that, I do think that you have like certain level of responsibility. What happened here was really bad for the industry itself, because now we have a precedent of a court going against developers. And that is something that I think that is like, it harms all of us. And I hope that this like gets like a little bit better with like the product liability directive and the smart contracts standards, that we can actually like try to mitigate the damage that was done. Whether they should have been prosecuted or not, I think that there is a slightly disagreements. I do think that you should be responsible if you proactively encourage people to commit crime, and if you know that something is happening and you don't report it or take actions. Because what happens with money laundering and financial of terrorism in the back, and is what we tend to forget, is child pornography, human trafficking, and other human rights violations that really impact the people that, like, the technology in the first place try to support, right? Because we were going on for inclusion, like you are excluded for the system because you don't have an identity. Here there is a tool that actually like can bring you back into the system. You don't have access to the financial system because you cannot have collaterals, or you don't have the infrastructure because you live in isolated areas. Here you have a tool to actually like get access to the tool, to the financial system, or a new financial system that can help you to improve the situations that you have, right? So I think that like this is the kind of conversation that we should always remember, because nothing is black and white. And if we forget for whom are we actually like doing this technology, and we focus only on the crypto part, for me like the crypto part is the less interesting, like the financial regulation is the less interesting, because this is just, as you said, one part. What is coming with the whole infrastructure, what's happening with identities, what is gonna happen with the DAOs, like how we are going to actually like push forward sustainable development goals and achieve like climate goals, for example, with like carbon credits. All of this part is the part that I'm really interested at. I think was mentioned before, like AI and all the threats, and how now AI is the main topic. I think that actually that's good for us, because finally we have something to prove that like blockchain is not just for the financial sector, but actually blockchain can be used to mitigate some of the risks that are created by AI, by using it as an underlying layer of technology that you can build on top to do decentralized AI, for example, and address the topic of biases, or do like data traceability to know which prompts are being used to train the model. So all of these things, I see it as an opportunity, but I would like actually like in the Tornado Cash situation to us also the crypto space to be critical on what was actually what's happening there. What was the type of communication? Because this is also a lesson learned for everyone there doing privacy tools. It really comes of how you're presenting your solution, what is like the things that you're saying, and what is like what you're aiming with doing this solution. Is actually protected a fundamental right of privacy, or are you actually enhancing others to use the technology for the things that they shouldn't be doing it?
Thank you. I hate to interrupt it, but it's a very, as you saw, you can touch upon many, many topics. We didn't have the time to go deeper. It's much more than just financial regulation, thank God. There's like core values to be discussed. I was hoping to have some like questions, but I feel like we ran out of time, or I know. We're having a workshop in a small room right now at 12 around the corner on democracy and blockchain with some policy people. If you want to join, it's open. The idea is a flying panel where everybody can join, just sit in, say what they want to say, and someone else gets up. We're gonna meet up in front of that room in like now, and at 12 going to that side room. So whoever is interested, and if you have questions, that would be like the place where you can participate in the debate. Thank you so much.